Hello, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Andrew Reed, and the book that I reviewed is The Three Laws of Performance by Steve Zaffron and Dave Logan. The theme of this book, as evidenced by its subtitle, is rewriting the future of your organization and your life, all by shifting the way that you look at and deal with problems. This book is made up of three parts. Part 1 outlines the three laws of performance. Part 2 describes the organizational implications of the three laws. And Part 3 focuses on how the three laws can impact you from an individual standpoint. The book and the three laws are based on the assumption that we all have a default future, a destiny, if you will, that has already been written based on our experiences, hopes, fears, dreams, expectations, and decisions about life. Similarly, organizations have default futures based on their past performance, circumstances, culture, and aspirations. These preordained destinies shape the level of performance that's possible for organizations and individuals, creating self-fulfilling prophecies. The three laws within this book crack the code of the default future, rewriting possibilities. So without further ado, let's get into the three laws of performance. But before I give you law number 1, it's important to recognize the problem with how we attack problems. And that's what's holding us back from the performance that we're looking to achieve. It's human nature to try to fix problems that seem to be holding us back. The issue with this is that our attempts to solve problems are typically surface level, leading to a mushroom effect of more problems. And as is always the case when considering change and transformation, it's important to be aware of all the ways and reasons that people will resist said change, which is discussed in great detail in Chapter 5 of the textbook. The key here is that a shift in perspective rather than a shift in variables is central to accomplishing the laws laid out in this book. With that said, law number 1 states that how people perform correlates to how situations occur to them. In other words, your actions will perfectly match the way that you see a situation, which explains why people do the things they do. Personally, this makes me think of the extent to which a person has an internal or external locus of control, as discussed in Chapter 7 of the textbook. As it relates to this law and how things occur to us, I would say that this concept has more to do with the perceptions associated with our external locus, the things that happen to us, than our internal locus, the things that we do, which result in outcomes. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what occur means in this law, I want to make it clear that the authors use the word occur as the reality that arises from your perspective on a situation, which can be based on the past and the future. This reminds me of the Stewart model of situational determinants discussed in Chapter 3 of the text, which outlines all of the different factors that can affect leaders. From a personal standpoint, I can confidently say that my experience at my first employer, which I recently moved on from after 5.5 years, greatly differed from the experiences of many of my peers, especially in the first year or so. Just because I feel that I had more of a positive and grateful outlook on circumstances than others did. Because of this, I was able to perform at a higher level and get the promotions that others were sitting around complaining about not getting. With the idea of law number 1, the facts of a situation are less important than the way that we interpret those facts. Now that we understand the law, we can assume that in order to make a meaningful change in performance, we need to change the way relevant situations occur to us. Something that I want you to think about here is, what if you could do something to alter the way that things occur to you and the people around you? What impact would this make in performance in the short term? What about the long term? Now that we understand law number 1, we can get into law number 2, which states that how a situation occurs arises in language. Now we already understand the situation occurs part, but now what about this language piece? Well, according to the authors, language can be thought of as the words, symbols, sentences, and communication used within an organization that can affect performance. Untying the knots of language begins with the recognition that what is said is more than just what is verbalized. This gets into the idea of the unsaid but communicated, which can entail body language, tone, etc., and carry a lot of weight in the way that situations occur to people. For the 9 months that I led an inside sales team, one of my greatest downfalls was my unsaid communication to reps who were underperforming. I've always worn my emotions on my sleeves, which can be a good thing, but it was definitely a weakness as a people leader. Once the unsaid but communicated is recognized, it is the leader's job to clear out this clutter by raising it all to the surface, bringing closure to any ongoing grievances, and moving forward so that the organization can have the space to create new language that will have a positive impact on how situations occur to people. All in all, law number 2 makes me think about the ways in which ethical leaders influence their organizations through compassionate, respectful, and supportive language, as discussed in chapter 9 of the text. In this way, leaders must demonstrate sincere authenticity in order to be convincing in their efforts to infuse appropriate language to their organizations. Something to consider here is what types of unsaid but communicated language has negatively impacted the perceptions of you and or your colleagues, and thus the overall performance of your organization. Building off of law number 2, law number 3 states that future-based language transforms how situations occur to people. Future-based, also known as generative language, has the power to generate new futures, establish new visions, and eliminate the blinders that prohibit people from seeing new possibilities. Conversely, descriptive language is past-oriented and is more focused on the facts of a situation as it exists. By explicitly focusing on descriptive language as opposed to generative language, people are more likely to fight the future they anticipate based on their experiences, paradoxically making it more likely to happen. This goes back to the idea of self-fulfilling prophecies. This concept also applies to the LMX theory discussed in chapter 10 of the textbook, which states that a significant component within the relationship between a leader and a follower is the perceptions and attributions that the parties have about each other. An example from my personal experience in this space stems from an undergrad group project that I was designated as the group leader for. One of my teammates had a reputation for not being a contributor and seemingly not being worried about peer evaluations. Because of this, I didn't even try to engage him in any significant portions of the project because I just knew that he wasn't going to contribute quality work. It's also important to realize that generative language cannot coexist with the default future that people have in mind. It completely replaces that default future. In order to engage in generative language, it's key to create a blank space which allows for declaring the future, which is not based on your past, that you're going to manifest. Back to my story about the group project that I led at my undergrad, I should have cleared my mind of all the preconceived notions that I had about the infamous team member and worked to inspire him to contribute in a significant way. An important call out here is that this future-based language is not synonymous with the change-oriented behaviors discussed in chapters 2 and 8 of the textbook, which entails the idea of a leader, him or herself, establishing and communicating a so-called appealing vision. Rather, this is more of the empowering participative behavior also discussed in the text, which we'll get into in just a moment. With that said, what I'd like you to consider here is whether you feel like you're in a position in your professional life to rid yourself of the clutter and default future to create a space to harness generative language to transform the way situations occur to you. If so, what types of generative language would you use? On how the 3 laws can lead to organizational performance, the authors discuss the power of the self-led organization. They note that the organization is the single greatest invention of the past few centuries, and that the challenges we face today stem from the narrow-minded view of what modern businesses think organizations ought to be, the corporation. This touches on one of the first topics we explored in this class, which is the leader versus manager debate. Over the past 150 plus years, managers have plagued organizations with their task-oriented and short-minded focus, while true leaders have leveraged relations-oriented behavior to inspire selflessly, taking organizations to great heights, like literally the moon. In chapter 1 of the textbook, we talk about all the ways that a leader can influence their followers, the strategies pursued, the coordination of activities, the development of skills, etc. Here, Zaffron and Logan emphasize the fact that the key trait of a leader is the ability to harness the concept of the self within the organization, which is the collective essence of all the people involved in its operations, including the future that inspires them and fulfills concerns. By empowering teams to lead themselves, leaders can change the way that the environment occurs to employees, leading to performance. As it relates to the causal chain of effects of leadership behavior, it's fair to say that empowering the sense of self has more to do with inspiring vision than training and coaching. It's also worth noting that even once the sense of self has been discovered, it must be maintained because it's definitely not permanent. Moving into part 3 of the book, the authors focus on how the laws of performance apply on a personal level. There is discussion about leveraging the 3 laws to overturn the life sentences that we give ourselves based on past experiences and realizing that taking on the task of self-reinvention cannot be procrastinated, an idea which aligns with the guidance in chapter 3 of the textbook to conquer procrastination. The authors discuss the milestones that individuals meet on their way to mastery, which are not to be confused with explicit steps. Finally, the book closes with 7 commitments that, when made, reliably break the performance barrier. These commitments are consistent with the concepts and ideas within the book, so go check out the book and find out what those commitments are. All right, guys, that's all I had for my book review of the 3 Laws of Performance. All in all, I really enjoyed the book and I look forward to applying the lessons to my personal and professional life. I'm also looking forward to seeing your discussion points and hearing how you felt about the book. Thanks again for watching.